Thanks for staying on. Earlier today in its meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee or the MPC of Bank Negara Malaysia decided to maintain the OPR or overnight policy rate at 1.7%. The global economy continues to recover, they say, led by improvements in manufacturing and export activity. And the latest indicators show that economic activity picked up in most advanced and regional economies with a more pronounced recovery momentum in China. And because of these arguments and many more, Bank Negara decided to announce that the OPR stays at 1.75. Now, the question is whether or not this is something that the market needs or whether or not this is something that is in preparation towards Budget 2021 that is going to be announced in just a few days from now in Parliament. So joining us here to unravel this conversation better is Jameel Ahmad, calling in from London. He is the Investment Director, the Director of Strategic Investment. Pardon me, Jameel, for blundering that particular one. But yeah, Jameel, let's understand a little bit better about why the OPR is currently being held in your opinion, and do you believe that this is the right amount of support that is needed right now for the market?
Look, I think the market is okay with it, but I would have gone left field here. I'm going to be a little bit more dramatic about things. We have a second wave that's unraveling throughout Europe. It's making its way to the United States. It's also making its way to Eastern Europe, such as Russia and so on. So it looks like recent history is repeating itself. So what I would like to see the emerging market central banks do, and although Bank Negara probably for today made the right decision, I'm concerned about global economic risks tailing off in Q4. To Malaysia's advantage, China is doing superbly. It's doing so well, both on the health, managing the crisis, and also in terms of the economic rebound, which bodes well for the region. But a global storm can come, just like it did 6 months ago. Because we have seen in the last week, we've seen France, Germany, Austria, Belgium, the United Kingdom, including some of the other nations too, announcing lockdown restrictions. And this is like a lot of deja vu and cliches of history repeating itself. So I think that global central banks right now in the emerging market space will see Australia cut rates. They did it overnight. Bank of England are likely to move tomorrow. If not move tomorrow, move soon. The Federal Reserve might even do the same should the US economy go into lockdown once again. So I think there's an opportunity here now to be more accommodative towards domestic growth and domestic forces, because maybe our friends internationally will not be able to trade with us the way that they were today, or they have been improving over the past couple of months. And I think Malaysia on that standpoint can and should benefit from lower interest rates. So this is the course of direction I will be looking at over the next couple of months. Economies here are already locking down up to 1 month, but it could be longer, which means that trade will not be coming from Europe to the degree that we know it anyway. And unless China's demand is that significant, perhaps Malaysia should see lower interest rates based on global economic uncertainty, because economies are locking down. I'm locking down in 2 days in London.
Yeah, the problem here is that 1.75, it's perhaps one of the lowest interest rates that we've had in the longest of time, if ever. And the question now is, the argument has to be very compelling if it were to lower the rates even further. Some banks have sent us their report late this evening talking about, while it's not great, it's actually good enough for the time being. Is this a possibility for them to leave the room open for more cuts next year then? Might not be towards this end, towards the end of the year, but we're looking at further cuts in the near future. Is that the way it should be done, at least for the time being?
I think that the window's open. Again, perhaps for today and for hindsight of what's happening today, the decision's the right one, but I think the windows and the door's definitely open. Look, the Bank of England are threatening to cut interest rates into negative territory as of this week. We saw Australia cut interest rates to 0.1%, if I remember the right statistic, only overnight. So this shows that the developed central banks are going to move. And I think that the emerging market central banks now can get ahead of the curve and perhaps be ahead of the central banks in terms of what they're moving in monetary direction. Because what we might see instead is, if this second wave, and unfortunately, if this is the case, if it gets out of control, you guys are going to be caught in the cold anyway because of what's economically happening around you. The same with other economies, whether you're isolated in Africa or whether you're isolated in the Middle East, you're going to notice global economic uncertainty. So what I would like to see in terms of a bit of a different approach is the central banks in your region could get ahead of the ball and move ahead of the developed the counterparts, because instead it might be that we look for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates or to issue a very long pause. We look for the Bank of England to move, the ECB to move, which Christine Lagarde said they're going to do last week anyway, Australia to move, and then the other central banks in the emerging market complex might then move after the other central banks. And I think that global investors might just see a little bit more innovation or appreciate seeing a bit more of a left field tactic, a bit more preparedness for what could be a troublesome Q4 for what economic growth. Of course, a vaccine can change this, but nobody should put their money on the vaccine right now because it's simply out of our realm. We do not know, only the health officials know and can tell us otherwise.
Yeah, of course. The vaccine conversation has to be kept, in view, but shouldn't shape how our decisions in the future will look like. However, in that statement that Bank Negara put out this afternoon, they say that the outlook, however, will continue to be significantly affected by global oil and commodity prices. They have a view that the underlying inflation is expected to remain subdued for next year amid continued spare capacity in the economy, and the NPC considers the stance of monetary policy to be appropriate and accommodative for the time being. Again, we're talking about everything is okay for the time being. But because of the arguments that you put forth just now, should we have taken a more proactive stance and cut the rates even further now before all these calamities start to hit us or possibly hit us? I mean, in hindsight, everything is done and dusted now, but what would be the arguments for a future cut in the near term? Is it as compelling as we thought it would be, at least how things with how things are right now?
I agree with the narrative for now, that for now it looks like things might be appropriate, but things are moving fast. This time 1 week ago, France and Germany were not in lockdown. The United Kingdom was not in lockdown, neither was Austria, Belgium, and so on. But even a couple of hours in this kind of environment can be a lifetime. Things can change very quickly when it comes to life circumstances. So as long as Malaysia and the South Asian economies, South Asia as a whole, does not see this huge spike in virus infections that we're seeing right now in the Western Europe, maybe perhaps things are okay and it's better to leave the window open. But if things do get out of control the way that it did 6 months ago, and we see a lot more deja vu, a lot of history repeating itself, the side of the ball is really that you could have acted today and could have moved before those kind of risks come to the headline. Time will tell, and devil's advocate is always an interesting game to play with these type of things. But perhaps, yes, investors would have been more positive when it comes to the currency and more positive internationally if there was a move today. Again, let's see how this unfolds.
All right, okay. And just to tie up our conversation, this conversation with the one that we had earlier, how do you think the Malaysian economy will react towards a Biden win versus a Trump win? How do you think this impending doom that Trump might win again is going to shift Malaysian focus of the Americans right now?
I think if Trump wins, it makes the OPR argument even more compelling that perhaps it could have moved today. There is absolutely no doubt at all that Trump will be pointing his finger like this and like this at China, as we've seen in the past 4 years. It might and likely will be even worse and even more aggressive, as we've already seen, because he's going to look for accountability for the pandemic, and he's also going to look for responsibility for the pandemic. Some of it to perhaps help his own cope, because obviously the United States has got a huge unfortunate death ratio. It's been hugely hit economically. We all know it's been hit so much economically that he can't lock down once again, because it would be a travesty what could happen to that economy. But he wants to point his finger at someone. And I think that if that finger is pointed at China to the degree that what it could be, it will not be good for your region, and Malaysia will feel the brunt of it the same way that Singapore would, also Indonesia and your neighboring countries. So I think that would then make the argument on interest rates even more compelling towards a left field case. If Biden wins, it will be much better for you guys. I could say that much.
All right. That was Jameel Ahmad, Director of Investment Strategy at NAGA. See, Jameel, I can get your thing right. Thanks for joining us and calling us from London. Stay safe there. Cases have been spiking there as well, as much as cases have been spiking here. But for now, that is it. That is our conversation for this evening. We're going to continue to cover the US elections throughout the day. So stay tuned with our channel right now at 501 AWANI. For now, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.